Welcome back to part 2 of my guide to genetic archives. Today I will be covering Gravitron Operator, the third mini-boss on the first floor, Kuralak the Defiler, the second boss of the instance, and Fetid Miscreation, the mini-boss guarding the teleporter to the second floor. If you have managed to kill genetic monstrosity, a small teleporter will become active next to the entrance of the instance, taking you directly to a graveyard at the center of the map. From there, you want to clear the trash and traverse through an egg hallway to the room containing Gravitron Operator. Unlike the egg hallway before genetic monstrosity, you will actually have to navigate your way through this egg hallway. I recommend having a single scientist make his or her way through the hallway and summon everyone else, as having more people in the hallway will result in more telegraphs. Keep in mind that you will need to clear the circular room before pulling the mini-boss. Gravitron Operator is probably the hardest mini-boss on the first floor, not because of its mechanics or the need to have a certain amount of raid DPS, but because there's quite a few RNG factors during the encounter that can cause players to die. The fight requires 1 tank and 3 to 4 healers. On paper, Gravitron Operator is very simple. She has infinite interrupt armors and can cast 3 spells. Upon engaging the boss, she will cast Gravity Reversal, a 2.5 second cast spell that will launch the entire raid upward towards the ceiling and put everyone at 1% health. The entire room will turn red, with the exception of a green bubble that will appear at a random place in the room. Once you reach the maximum height, you will begin falling slowly but at an increasing speed until you hit the ground. During the fall, you must travel to the green bubble in order to survive. All player abilities are disabled during this mechanic. After the fall, Gravitron Operator enters a 6-second moment of opportunity, and the race should be topped off before re-engaging the boss. There are 3 very important things you have to know about Gravity Reversal. First, if you position yourself under an obstacle in the room, whether it be the globe in the center of the room or the string-infested pipes behind the boss, you will hit the obstacle during the launch upward and not reach the height necessary to get into the green bubble unless it happens to be right next to you. Second, do not use sprint at any time during this mechanic, as it will cause you not to reach the maximum height and also fall quicker during the descent. Lastly, you can run over the top of the globe in the center of the room if the green bubble spawns on the opposite side of the room. After the initial gravity reversal, the boss will repeat this mechanic at 75%, 50%, and 25% health. Note that gravity reversals do not override other spells, meaning its cast can be slightly delayed. Gravitron Operator can also cast Gravity Spike, where she continuously targets 2 random members in a raid and puts a circular telegraph under their feet. After 1 second, the telegraph will explode, dealing damage and launching those inside the telegraph upward. The players will not take fall damage on the way down. This mechanic therefore requires the raid to be spread out around the boss to minimize the amount of damage taken from gravity spikes. I recommend having players targeted by gravity spikes to stand still, while other players who are inside the telegraph dodge out. The last spell Gravitron Operator casts is Gravity Swell. She will cast this spell approximately every 25 seconds, and only after the second gravity reversal, meaning you won't have to worry about this mechanic for the first 25% of the fight. During the swell, a large circular telegraph will appear under the boss, and after 1.5 seconds, those inside the telegraph will be sucked towards the boss and damaged. The damage of Gravity Swell is static, shared by all those inside the telegraph after the 1.5 second cast. The damage becomes unmanageable when you only have 11 or 12 people left in the raid. I recommend staying in the swell, and have healers be ready to pop their AoE heals after the raid takes damage. Ranged classes should immediately roll out of melee range to avoid stacking gravity spikes. Gravity Swell combined with gravity spikes can sometimes result in RNG deaths, where the damage hits certain players at the same time, killing them instantly. After the 3rd and 4th gravity reversal at 50% and 25% health, the raid should stay away from the boss after the fall unless the boss is right next to the raid. This is because the boss casts Gravity Swell right after her moment of opportunity, so if you don't have the entire raid topped off and in a position to take damage, it will result in a wipe. Just stay spread out and away from the boss until the cast is finished. As a group, you will just have to accept that some people will die during this encounter. This boss can be frustrating at times, but it gets easier once you get used to the mechanics. Next, make your way back through the egg hallway and towards Kuralak the Defiler. Kuralak the Defiler is by far the hardest boss on the first floor. She has no interrupt armors and requires 2 tanks and 3 to 4 healers to do. The boss cannot be taunted, so watch your threat. Kuralak will not only test the individual player's ability to react to mechanics and the raid's overall DPS and coordination, she's also extremely punishing on mistakes and early deaths. Before starting the fight, the raid needs to understand the major mechanics of Kuralak's two phases. First, the hide and seek phase, and second, the egg phase. During the hide and seek phase, Kuralak will cast Vanish into Darkness at the beginning of the fight and every 50 seconds from the time she is interrupted. Vanish into Darkness temporarily blinds the entire raid and Kuralak goes invisible, teleporting to one of the 6 outer pillars around the room. Meanwhile, the center of the room will begin filling up with red telegraphs. In order to stop the telegraphs from killing the entire raid, Kuralak must be found and interrupted. This will return the boss to the center of the room and clear the telegraphs. During the egg phase, Kuralak will begin by casting Chromosome Corruption, turning a random member not at the top of the threat table into an egg. The egg will pulse AoE raid damage and must be interrupted. It has no interrupt armor. The person in the egg and the person who interrupts the egg will gain a debuff, which significantly increases their damage dealt while taking a dot damage for the remainder of the encounter. For the rest of the egg phase, Kuralak will periodically cast Cultivate Corruption, which will turn people with the egg debuff into eggs, meaning the raid will begin with 1 egg, then 2, then 4, then 8, and finally 16. If a player interrupts more than 1 egg, he or she will die. If the person with the egg debuff dies, Kuralak will turn another player without the debuff into an egg, requiring another interrupt. Since you won't have enough people to interrupt 16 eggs even if everybody stays alive, this mechanic creates a rage timer for the encounter. Therefore, the raid needs to do some pre-planning before starting the fight. First, you will need to assign 6 people to each of the 6 outer pillars for the hide and seek phase. The 6 people will start the fight at their respective pillars as Kuralak will cast Vanish into Darkness a few seconds after she is engaged. During the phase, the entire outer rim of the room will be covered in a red telegraph, dealing constant damage to those in it. Each of the 6 pillars have rotating lasers similar to that of the 4 inner pillars. After she casts Vanish into Darkness, Kuralak will appear directly behind one of the 6 pillars, Stealth, meaning you will not be able to see her unless you are within approximately 20 in-game meters of her. She has no interrupt armor, so a single interrupt is enough. After she is interrupted and returned to the center of the room, the 6 people will have to navigate their way through 2 sets of rotating lasers back to the center of the room. Those 6 people will have to make their way to their respective pillars to interrupt Kuralak every time she casts Vanish into Darkness. I recommend assigning the off-tank and mobile classes to the pillars. Spell Slingers, Medics, Stalkers, and Warriors work well. A new group should expect to interrupt 3 Vanish into Darkness, including the one in the beginning. Second, the raid will need to set up egg positions and interrupt rotation for the egg phase. You want your top DPS to interrupt the first sets of eggs, and you want to assign eggs to specific positions so you do not overlap the eggs. I recommend downloading an add-on called Zen Marker. It allows you to place markers on the floor that can be seen by other people with the add-on. It makes organizing egg positions and interrupt rotations easier, and says people will be assigned by numbers. It will also make adjusting interrupt orders during the fight easier if people die. After you have the 6 pillar people in the egg phase set up, you can now begin the fight. The hide and seek phase will begin when you engage the boss and lasts until Kuralak reaches 72%. After she's engaged, she will immediately cast Archive Overload, overloading the 10 pillars in the room. The overload will cause the pillars to emit a telegraph around them and leave a small safe zone near the boss. This mechanic is not meant to kill the raid, but rather to get you into position for the lasers. Next, she will cast her first Vanish into Darkness, temporarily blinding the raid and powering up the rotating lasers around the 10 pillars. The lasers rotate counterclockwise, creating a safe zone in the dead center of the room and a between 2 pillars as long as the raid strafes clockwise with the lasers. It takes a few tries to get used to the rhythm of the lasers, but once you get used to them, it's an easy mechanic. Throughout the fight, the boss will target 3 random members of the raid and cast Vileness, a mortar shell type ability. Vileness deals damage to those who gets hit by it and applies a slowing debuff to that person. Avoid getting hit. At around 72%, Kuralak transitions into the egg phase, disabling the rotating lasers around the room. She then casts Chromosome Corruption, resulting in the first egg of the phase. During the egg phase, the 4 inner pillars will take turns overloading, emitting a large circular telegraph around the pillars that explode after a few seconds, and leaving behind a red telegraph that damages anyone who steps into it. Approximately 10 seconds after chromosome corruption, Kuralak will cast a first outbreak, a spell that covers the entire room with a red telegraph and explodes after 8 seconds, killing anyone inside the telegraph. To avoid death, the ray must move behind one of the non-overloaded pillars and line aside the spell. The non-overloaded pillars are denoted by its green appearance and the lack of red telegraphs around it. After the first outbreak, the raid will have 35 seconds to burn the boss until the next outbreak. During this time, simply avoid vileness and overloads. It is during this 35-second window that the boss casts her first DNA Siphon, a 3-second cast spell that must be interrupted by the off tank. DNA Siphon drops the main tank down to the bottom of the threat table and propels whoever interrupts the spell to the top of the table. This signals a tank swap. Since Taunt is disabled and those with the egg debuff will generate increased threat due to the damage buff, a failure to interrupt DNA Siphon, or if the wrong person interrupts it, will likely result in a wipe. It is almost impossible for tanks to get threat back. After the 35-second burn, the boss will cast her second outbreak. The 2 people with the egg debuffs should be aware of their positions, as cultivating corruption will happen immediately after the outbreak. Interrupt the 2 eggs, and now you have 4 people with the egg debuff. Continue to burn the boss while dodging reds until the 3rd outbreak. About 10 seconds after the 3rd outbreak, Kuralak will cast her second DNA Siphon, prompting another tank swap. Ten seconds after the DNA Siphon, Kuralak will cast her second Cultivate Corruption, forming 4 eggs. 4 people will interrupt these eggs, and now you have 8 egg debuffs. About 5 seconds after Cultivate Corruption, Kuralak will cast her 4th outbreak. After the 4th outbreak, the raid will have 35 seconds to burn the boss before the 5th outbreak. During the 5th outbreak, the 8 egg people should be aware of their position as the 3rd Cultivate Corruption comes right after the outbreak. This is the key moment in the encounter. Whether you successfully go from 8 to 16 egg debuffs will determine whether you kill the boss or not. If someone dies or fails to interrupt, make sure you have one of the 4 backup people interrupt extra eggs. Approximately 4 to 5 seconds after Cultivate Corruption, Kuralak will cast her 3rd DNA Siphon, prompting the last tank swap. At this point, the entire raid can be a little hectic, but the tank must be aware of DNA Siphon. Losing aggro will surely result in a string of debuffed DPS dying and forming extra eggs. Normally what happens after the AA Cultivate Corruption is that you will have a little more than 25 seconds to burn the boss until the 6th outbreak. After the 6th outbreak, you will have 35 seconds to burn the boss before the 7th outbreak. This will be your last chance to kill her. The 16 egg Cultivate Corruption will happen right after the 7th outbreak, wiping the raid. As you have probably noticed by now how much of the egg phase is scripted. You know exactly what major mechanics will occur, so it's all about execution. Once you have a solid plan going into the fight and you execute it well enough, the boss will die. Lastly, I want to talk about Kuralak's challenge, Deadly Dense Revolution. To complete the challenge, you must defeat Kuralak without getting hit by Overload or Tainted Ventilation. It is very straightforward. Tainted Ventilation are the rotating lasers from the 10 pillars during the hide and seek phase, and Overload is the circular telegraph emitting from the 4 inner pillars during the egg phase. If no one in the raid gets hit by them during the entire encounter, you will complete the challenge. Killing X89, Kuralak will open the door to the room containing the teleporter to the 2nd floor. After you make your way to the room, you will encounter the last mini-boss on the 1st floor, Fetid Miscreation. Everyone seems to cheese this boss, and honestly I have no clue how to do the encounter the proper way. To Before the pull, have everyone except one of your tanks clump up and position their backs to the wall. Have that tank go into the room and pull Fetid Miscreation out towards the raid. While the boss is moving, do not heal or DPS. When the boss gets in front of the raid, have your other tank, who is stacking with the raid, to taunt the boss. Now you can begin healing and damaging the boss. Fetid Miscreation will apply a stacking 35-second debuff to the tank it's attacking, making the tank take increased damage. Therefore, the two tanks must periodically swap aggro. Have the tank taunt after the first 4 to 5 stacks, and swap every time the debuff stacks wear off. Fetid Miscreation will also periodically gain a stackable self buff. Those stacks should be purged off by medics or espers. The boss will also cast a spell called Genetic Consumption, granting it 15 interrupt armors and does something with it. Just interrupt it. And that's basically the entire fight. Congratulations, you've now completed the first floor of Genetic Archives. Part 3 of this guide will feature Phage Tech Guardians, the first 2 mini-bosses on the second floor, and Phage Maw, the third boss of Genetic Archives. Please like and subscribe if you find this video helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.